Okay, now we're recording. All right, go for it.
Okay, my name is Everett Walton Graves. I was born on August 6th, 1921 in our family home on the farm in Gibson County, Tennessee, near Humboldt. My father's brothers and sisters bought adjoining farms, and we had a community then of the Peaks family, my dad's sister, the Sanford family, another sister, and Talton Everett Graves, a brother, and Maurice Graves, a brother. We all grew up together and went to school together, and we had a great deal of fun together. We attended the Pleasant Hill Methodist Church, and most of the families that I have mentioned previously attended there also, along with others in the neighborhood and surrounding territory. All in all, we had a wonderful life together. I have two older brothers, one older sister, Evelyn. My brothers were Ralph and Russell. Younger brother, Billy Sunday, and two younger sisters, Martha Lee Bodkin and Betty Jones. We had a wonderful life together. Mother and Dad taught us the true values of life, such as hold your head up, be proud, but not too proud. Honor your fellow man. Be honest and truthful. And take care of your own. My first year in school was at our church school building at Pleasant Hill Methodist Church. The school building sat between our church and the Presbyterian church about 150 yards up the road. It was an odd situation. Neither church could afford a full-time minister. So on the Sundays that our minister was there, who shared a church in Gibson, Tennessee, with us at our church, when he preached while we had Sunday school and preaching at our church, the members of the Presbyterian church up the road attended Sunday school in their building and then came down to our church for the morning worship hour. Conversely, on opposite Sundays, we did the same with them. In fact, I was baptized during a revival meeting in the Presbyterian church by a Presbyterian minister, a Dr. Maurice Pepper, who was not only the minister there, but a dear friend of everyone in the community. My heart has fond moments of remembrances that took place in those two church worship services or worship houses. We had many friends, and we loved them all. Now that I'm 83 years old and have been around a while, I can better relate to those times as being wonderful, friendly, warm, nice, and just a pleasure to be a part of. My mother and father, hard workers on our farm, but they taught us integrity and honesty. Treat our fellow man as we would want to be treated. And we live by those facets of life to this day. Between our church and the Presbyterian church was a 2-room schoolhouse with wood stoves and bordered on one side by a woods area from which we got some of our firewood for our heating stoves. The other side by gravel roads that led to Humboldt and Medina. And it was there that my older brothers and sister, Ralph, Russell, and Evelyn, started to school. It was my first year there when I was 6 years old, barely 6 on August the 6th that month, before school started. And I remember so well our teacher and principal there, who came out from Humboldt with her horse and buggy each morning, and we were happy to assist her in unhitching her horse, putting him in the little barn there and putting some hay in for him to munch on during the day. After school was out, she hitched her horse back to the buggy and drove the approximately 3.5 miles back to Humboldt, where she lived. There were happy days, there were idyllic days, no worries except the fact that we didn't have much, but we had our pride and we had our love for each other, and we had a very, very enjoyable time. I remember one instance when, in walking to school, from our house to this school, it was about 1.75 miles, with the 3/4 mile being a dirt road, which was mostly muddy during the winter, fall and winter and early spring months. And my dad had a sailor straw hat. And in my snooping around, well, I found out that I could wear it and keep it on my head. So I wore it to school one day, and down the road from there, where my Uncle Tout and his wife, Aunt Maud Graves, lived, there was a family on that farm, the Melton family, one of the boys of which his name was, we called him Slick. I don't know what his real name was. But he did torment me by running up behind me, taking my hat off and sailing it down that muddy road, and it might go across a fence in a field, and I had to climb over and get it through the muddy ditch and what have you. And I vowed in my mind that one day he would pay for his misdeeds, and I was going to just whip him good. However, he was twice my age almost, but not twice my size. And as it came to pass, a few years later, when I had driven our truck down in Uncle Talton's fields to put on a load of cabbage to take to the market, Slick was working, and he was sitting the crates up on the truck where I racked them, and I just had a wild hair. I said, "Slick, do you remember those days when you pulled my straw hat off and sailed it away?" He laughed, he laughed big and said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you know what? Today is payoff day." And I started down off the truck. Well, he turned white in the face and reached up on the top of a stack of crates of cabbage where the butcher knives were left after the crops were cut and put in the crates, and picked up a butcher knife. I said, "Now, Slick, I've really been just kidding with you. I don't have any desire to fight with you, but if you keep your knife in your hand, I don't have any choice, and we're going to have at it." Well, he dropped the knife like it was hot, and we went back to loading cabbage, and that was the end of that episode. But anyway, we grew up, and we went to school out at Pleasant Hill School for 1 year, and then we started to school in Humboldt at the elementary school there in my year of my second grade. I remember well my teacher, Miss Mattie Lou Jones, and she was a jewel. And we went through there through to the 6th grade, and I made lifelong friends in that span of time. And at my age today, as I've mentioned, of 83, not many of those people are still around. I have Bill Lane, who died 2 years ago, and he and I were co-captains of the football team, and there was Bill Hamilton, who was an end, and we threw a few passes to him. And there was Hump Campbell. Most everybody had a nickname. There was Moon Mullins. Of course, I'll tell you now my name, which I guess I'm real proud of. And my older brother Ralph started calling me that when I was 6 years old, as he claimed. And I vaguely remember getting a potato hamper, turning it bottom side up out in the backyard on Sunday after church, and I'd preach to them. They started calling me preacher. And to this good day, until I moved to Georgia in 1960, that was my name. And when I got to Georgia, I started using my name Everett, and that's what I go by now. And we get Christmas cards and such addressed to Preacher and Mrs. Graves. And I guess I'm blessed by having that name. At least my mother thought that I would be a minister. And so I guess I sadly disappointed her in the fact that I didn't have a calling in that direction, although I have always had a love of the Master and of Jesus, and have lived by his creeds as best I could all my 83 years. To move on, my second year I went to Humboldt, as did the rest of them, and I think our school out by the church closed and was dismantled. And most of the kids had moved on. I went through the 6th grade, 8th grade there in Humboldt, and then moved on to high school in the 9th grade. And I had all my friends still with me. We went through the 9th, the 10th, 11th, and 12th grades together. And as I mentioned earlier, those people are still my dear friends. High school was uneventful, except that I decided that I would follow in the footsteps of Ralph and Russell and two of our first cousins, Howard and Robert Graves, in playing football. I couldn't go out until I was a junior simply because I wasn't big enough. I wasn't mean enough. I weighed 125 pounds about, and a junior I weighed 133. When the season started and when it was over, I weighed 150 and had grown into a sizable young man, well built and a muscle or two here and there, and thoroughly enjoyed the game of football. I loved to play defense because although we had to go both ways, we never left the field. The ball just changed hands when we had to kick it or when we received a kick. So we played the games and we had pretty successful seasons. Our coach was one of our teachers, a University of Tennessee graduate who played for General Bob Neyland at the University in Knoxville and made all Southeastern Conference as an end. He was a big man, about 6'2" and 180 and 85, 90 pounds. And he was an excellent coach. He had a lot of patience with we country boys. And he was a country boy from Brewston, Tennessee, where he played football there at Brewston High School. I had the privilege of playing for him for 3 years. And I also had the privilege of playing with my friends. And we had some knockdown and dragouts and not a few fights. And we had pretty good seasons. I don't think we ever lost over 3 games a season. And we enjoyed good times. Football was a real thrill for me. And although I got beat about my first year, I soon learned how to temper those knocks with putting out a few of my own. And we got along just fine with everybody. We thought, and I guess we did. Upon graduation from high school, I worked on the farm with my dad. I wanted to go to college and maybe on a scholarship, but I wasn't big enough, fast enough, and probably not smart enough, and I couldn't throw the ball 60 yards like a lot of the kids could. But we got by and we had successful games and we had a ball. I remember in one game, we had a little guy named Melvin Monroe who weighed 130 pounds, wringing wet. And he played blocking back and fullback and tailback. He always wanted, let me run with it, let me run with it. Well, in our senior year, I had graduated up to where I was calling the plays and kind of running a team on the field and kind of being in charge, you know, although I really didn't know it at the time. But they kind of looked up to me, I guess, to tell them what to go. I remember Pretty Boy Boyne, in his first game, he said, "What do I do on this kickoff?" And I said, "Well, you see that gap in the line down there where our team's like, yeah. Well, you go down and get in that gap, and when we kick this ball, you go straight for the guy that catches it, and you put him on the ground." And that's exactly what he did. We had a lot of fun. Pretty Boy was a good running back, and I remember and later on when we had reunions, I had to look up to the guy because he'd grown a good foot and a half since he grew up from his playing days in high school and weighed about 200 pounds. And I said, "Pretty Boy, you remember that?" And he said, "I sure do." And I says, "Okay." So we played games, and I called Bill Lane, who was the center, and Bill was down there snapping that ball back, and he really couldn't see what was going on. So I made a remark to that effect one day, and lo and behold, the next game I was calling the plays. And we ran the Tennessee system, and we put a man under center to call the signals, and he would roll out and go with the play and do whatever that play called for. And but the ball was always snapped back to the tailback. So in my second year, I was promoted to fullback. And I played in that number 3 spot back there in the backfield, and most of it was blocking and for the ball carrier. And Bill Pender was our tailback the first year, and then I graduated to it my second and third year. My third year, I played tailback. I did the kicking and the passing and running with the ball about half of the time. Now this was fun, and we had a lot of fun. We threw a lot of passes, and we threw passes for touchdowns, and we had good receivers, and Moon Mullins being one, Dick Green being another, and my next door neighbor out on the farm was Willie Sanford, who was the other end, and he caught a few passes. Willie had a problem, though. When he'd catch a ball, he'd just go right onto the ground. He wouldn't think to run. He'd just fall. And that caused a lot of concern to a lot of us when he's in a wide open field, but he'd fall down. But we didn't try to stop it because he had glue on his fingers, and you put it where he could reach it, he'd catch it. And we had Hump Campbell, who was playing tackle, and we had Raymond Craddock a tackle, and we had Billy Pender, who was tailback the year before I got to be tailback. Incidentally, Billy was on another subject right now, if I may digress forward. Billy was killed in World War II, and he was in the Navy, and we had two boys, the Taylor brothers, who played on that team. They were killed in a foxhole in the Pacific. And two other brothers who on a team, the Pennington boys, they were on an Arizona ship, the ship Arizona, at Pearl Harbor when that was bombed, and they were killed inside that ship. And I have stood with tears in my eyes and read their names on the memorial at Pearl Harbor in later years. And then we had Billy Pender, as I mentioned, a tailback, was killed on a ship in the Pacific. And Babe Silverstein, a tackle, and Babe afforded our team many laughs. You could go at him and he'd jump through the wall. So we'd get out there and scrimmage and catch a coach not looking, and we'd start calling signals, and just as we called for the ball to be snapped, and Jew Baby, as we called him with respect and love in our hearts for him, he would salivate that guy across the line from him. It was funny. And the coach got after us about it, so we had to quit that. We had a lot of fun in high school, and we moved on, and I digressed a bit to the war, and that came upon us because the Germans were raising havoc all over Europe, and we knew we would be going in someday. We already had a number of our group killed at Pearl Harbor in '41, December the 7th, as I mentioned previously. And we grieved for them, and we looked forward to the time when we would go in and do what we could in the war effort. Well, I worked on a farm with my dad for a year. The football scholarship didn't materialize, although I did get letters and went to Memphis State in Memphis and to University of Tennessee at Martin, which was a junior college at that time. But I had to have cash money at Martin, and I just wasn't big enough or fast enough to be on a team at Memphis State. It was a 4-year college. So with a broken heart, almost temporarily, I went back home, and I might have, on second thought, stuck with the Martin team and made it, because they gave me a uniform and said, go practice. And I didn't have any trouble catching a football. I could really catch them. But I only practiced one day, And I went in to see the coach to see what it would take to go to school there. And he said, well, son, it will take about $300 for you to enroll in school. Well, we didn't have any money at home, and we had scrapped and saved and everything for my brother Ralph to go to University of Tennessee for 2 years. And I remember how hard it was and what a struggle it was to get up money, $10 even, to send to him at school. And I just decided in my mind that I wouldn't put my parents through that, although they were willing to give it a shot. I said, no, I've got to go in the military anyway, so I'll just go ahead and do it. So in early 42, after Pearl Harbor in December 41, I drove down to Memphis and volunteered for the Air Force and flight training. Took the written exam while I was there, passed that, and came back home, and I was in the Air Force, waiting to be called for flight training. And when I reported to my draft board, while the guy that was in charge there got a little upset at me, said, we're not going to release you. I says, the hell you aren't. You don't have any choice. And I guess we better bleep that word. And, but he made me mad, and I had the pleasure of seeing him on a troop train a couple of years later after I was back from combat, going through Smyrna, Tennessee, where I was stationed. He had to draft himself. And I went up and pecked on the window and gave him a high-handed salute and grinned at him. And he sat there with a sick look on his face. Well, anyway, that was just one of the episodes that happened. I went into flight training. I was sent on August the 10th. I was sent to Maxwell Field, Alabama. Went through pre-flight there for 2 months. Got a lot of drilling and a lot of exercising, and learned a lot about the military and about being a soldier. And then I went to primary flight school. Didn't have any problem there. Only problem, and it was funny. I had a guy named Copenhaver I was assigned to as my instructor. He was from Kingsport, Tennessee. Of course, he kind of took me under his wing, being a fellow Tennessean. And we called him Copy. And he used to take me to his house, and his wife would cook a dinner for us and everything. On the first flight with him, I got in an airplane, and they cranked it up, and he said, let's go out to the flight line. So I taxied it out there as best I could. And he showed me how to take off, and I did that. And then we went out flying, and I did some S-turns and wind drift turns and things like that. And he said, well, it's time to go in. So I was real smart, you know. I entered the traffic pattern going the wrong way, and airplanes coming at me. He grabbed a stick and rolled us out and got us in the pattern. He said, I ought to take you back and wash you out. I just nodded my head and said, well, go ahead. But he took mercy on it. He didn't. We got straightened out, and we went out, and I never had another glitch in my flying through primary, basic, and advanced. That one with that traffic pattern taught me that lesson. Cope and I became good friends. He went by in Humboldt one time while I was overseas, and bless his heart, he went by, found where my parents were, and went by to see them, which I respected very, very much. In basic, about the same thing. I didn't have any trouble flying the airplane. I didn't have any trouble with military exercises or doing whatever we did in our training. and advanced, it was the same story. I breezed right through that. Flying became as natural to me as I think it did to my son Butch later when he got in the Air Force and went flying those jets and stuff, because he seemed to enjoy it and did a super job. Got out and advanced. It was a proud day when I got my wings in commission. Although, yes, my mother and dad brought my girlfriend, Evelyn, and my future wife, and the mother of my children down to Bennettsville. Where did I graduate from? Turner Field, yeah. Turner Field, Georgia, down at Albany. They came down for graduation, and she pinned my wings on me. Proud moment. Then I went over to Maxwell Field after a leave and went into the B-24 transition school. And a sideline to that was we were interviewed individually by Lieutenant Colonel when we graduated, and he asked us, "Well, son, what do you want to fly?" And I says, "The biggest thing we've got." I went through twin engine school and had finished that with good berries, good marks. And he grinned at me, and I thought, "What?" And he says, "Well, everybody in this class is going to B-24s. 95% of them will be in B-24s, because Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan was turning out a 24 about around the clock, about 2 an hour or some such, and that's what we had. B-17s were over with us when we went to Italy, but they weren't very many in number as we were. We had 1,200, and they had about 240 B-17s, and we had 1,200 B-24s. And this colonel smiled, and he said, "Well, son, that's where you're going, so be happy with it." I said, "I'm very happy with it, sir." So I went, after a leave at home a few days, I went to Maxwell Field, and on the way out there, I was riding in the car with somebody, in a taxi, going out there from downtown, and there were a couple of guys walking along the street, and I said to the taxi driver, and they were pilots, I had seen them around, I said, "Let's pick those two guys up. They're probably going where we are." Picked them up, and lo and behold, they were my roommates when we got to the barracks. It was A.J. Mills, who is still a dear friend, and Monroe, and Hooten was there. So the four of us, we comprised that 4 students. We had the same instructor there in transition school, and we flew together. We were walking out to the airplane, and I made the remark to them, I said, "I don't believe that big ugly SOB will get off of the ground." And our instructor, Captain Gay, he heard it. He came, walked over. He said, "How about you getting up in the cockpit to see if you can get that ugly thing off the ground?" I said, "Well, you open your mouth again." So I got up in there and cranked it up and took off. I said, "Now, you ready to go?" And he said, "I'm ready to go." So I taxied out on the runway and took it off. We flew. And I dearly loved that old airplane. It was a boxcar, but it had good engines, and it was a good airplane. Went through that without any problem. And AJ and I don't know, alphabetically, I suppose, caused it, but he and I were assigned to the same bomb group, the 4th 60th, in the same squadron, 62nd. And we went to Italy. He took a crew, and I went on a crew. And we went over there in the 762nd Squadron, and we flew with each other on each other's wing time to time throughout our entire career in combat. So I was fortunate in that respect, And he and I went to try to find Monroe and Houghton, but we didn't. But they were in Italy too, flying B-24s in other groups. But we flew there for being. Now let me back up just a minute and set the record straight. When we left transition, it came to my attention at Clovis, New Mexico, when we went out there to pick up our crews, that they had assigned me a co-pilot spot. And I was not only sadly disappointed, but I was mad as H. I refused to even go to the flight line. I says, you give me a crew and an airplane and I'll lead the bunch if you want me to. But I am not going to fly co-pilot to anybody. Well, I was fortunate because Charles Lincoln, who was a captain at the time, I met him as a squadron commander. And we transitioned down to Chatham Air Force Base in Savannah, Georgia, as a group. And there we got our new airplanes. And I'm still a co-pilot to a dear friend, still is, John Hertrick, in St. Louis, from St. Louis. And I flew my first 9 missions with that crew and taught him how to fly the airplane. He had transitioned from B-17s to B-24s. And here I am, a first pilot, first officer in a B-24, flying as his co-pilot. So I did a little thinking, and I said, well, I'm here for a purpose, so I'll teach him how to fly this thing. Fly this airplane, and I did, and he made a good pilot. And I remember one time Rodney Day, our navigator, was standing back of my seat. And we came in one night and he flew right into the prop waist of the plane and hit. And we went from one wingtip point to the ground to the other, just rolling back and forth. I jumped on the controls and straightened the airplane up, and old Rodney tapped me on the shoulder. Man, I'm glad you're in here with us. And that made me feel good. Nobody heard it but me. And we went on, and we got along fine, and we got over there, and we were flying missions. And on the 9th mission, I was sitting in the right seat, and we were coming back from a mission, little run up there, practically a milk run. We were on the way back, we were down to 12,000 feet, and had our mask off and our flak suits off, steel helmets off, and all at once there was 3 flak bursts right in front of our nose. We were number 4. Number 1 is up above us, and we were looking up at his tail turret. And these 3 bursts went off, boom, boom, right between our nose and that tail of that airplane. And I just turned to Herc and I said, man, that was close. And about that time, there were 3 more right under us. And they about shot the tail off our airplane. And a piece came through the window, right under the right windshield, right side window on my side, and caught me in the shoulder and knocked me out on the floor. I was flying the airplane at the time. I was just sitting there minding my own business, flying this number 4 spot. And formation flying came as natural to me as eating. And I was sitting there with my nose 20 feet below that tail turret, just sitting there with them. And when these bursts came, and I got back up in the seat, and Rodney came up, and everybody was, he and Abner both, our bombardier, were there on the flight deck with us. And Rodney picked up my mic around my throat strap around my mic on my neck and said, man, you got some hole up here. You got some blood up here. And there was a little hole there, and he felt around and had a knot down here behind his ear. He says, you got a little something in there. I said, okay. And I'm sitting there, and Hercules force took over instantly when I was knocked loose from the controls. And we went on down to Foggia, which had a hospital, and they had airplanes coming in there from all over, and firing flares, people wounded and dead. He kept circling the field. Finally, I said, Herky, you go land this airplane? Am I going to have to do it? And I couldn't even move this arm. Really. He said, well, they won't give me a light. I said, we got patterns full of airplanes firing flares. I said, okay, we'll wait for them. So we did. Went in, landed, and the guy came in, and I had on a brown British flying suit over my long handles, my ODs, my flight suit, my coveralls, and I had on this brown, heavy, quilted but quilted, insulated brown flight suit. I looked like I weighed 300 pounds and felt like I did. And then on top of that, we, of course, had our flak suit and a Mae West on top of that, and then we had our parachute harness under the flak suit, under the Mae West. And I had to get out all that, so he didn't do that. He took out his scissors, he cut my suit off right around my shoulder, right down to the skin. And I said, Doc, don't cut my suit, it's the only one I got. And he said, son, you're not going to need it for a while. I said, oh. So he cut it off, left my bare arm sticking out, all that stuff. And got some blood, tried to stop the bleeding and couldn't. And I had a hole just about as big as a silver dollar, it looked like. It couldn't have been bigger than a quarter, though. In my right shoulder, right through that muscle, and took it all out up through there. Well, they got me in the hospital, and
Doesn't matter.
they got me in the hospital, and the doctor there, this hospital, to digress, had come in on a ship in the Barry Harbor, down south of us. I learned later, and they loaded it off of the ship, offloaded it into trucks, took it to Barry, and staffed that two-story hospital with about probably 50 or 60 rooms in it. It had been a TV sanitarium for Mussolini when he was in power there. Well, we just confiscated it like as Nita Lincoln, my squadron commander, called it when I found her a roll of film one day. She says, what'd you do, make a midnight requisition? I says, so kind of like, not much. I asked for them and offered to pay for them, but they wouldn't take the money. But anyway, this doctor in charge of that hospital detachment was named Garrison. He was a captain, and he cut this mess out of the shoulder and took this out of my neck back here. And I remember a big old fat sergeant laying across me on the operating table I came to. In fact, they shot me with some, I guess they called it truth serum or something back then. What was it? I don't remember, Bo, what it was.
Pentothal?
Pentothal, yeah. They shot me with that and had me count to 100, and I counted to 100 and lay there. They said, shoot him again, so they gave me another shot. And of course, I went out like a light. But I came to in a little while, and they were through working on me, but he was still there. I said, get off of me. What are you doing up here? He said, you're the strongest little devil I ever saw. He must have weighed 300 pounds. And he was laying across me, holding me on the operating table. I said, well, I'm awake now. You can get up. And I got up. I didn't get up. They put me in a wheelchair and took me to my room. And for 4 days, I didn't move. For 4 days, I bled, and they washed that blood off of bandages they packed up on my back. And I just was so weak from the loss of blood, and they didn't give me a drop. And the colonel of the hospital came by later. I remember seeing him once. He came by and stuck his head in the door and asked how that guy was, how's the soldier that's bleeding so badly? And the nurse grabbed him and they went down the hall talking. But anyway, he was concerned that I wasn't going to live. Of course, he didn't know this Tennessee guy. I wasn't about to die. I had some things I had to do. So I got up about my 4th day and went to the restroom, and a roommate was there for surgery, and he was ambulatory, and He said, "You better get back in that bed." I said, "I got to pee." So I went in there and peed. Well, they come in there after a while with all this contraption. They were going to put it on me to relieve my bladder. I says, "I don't need that. I've already been." "You what?" And I said, "Well, ask my roommate. He'll vouch for me." And he clowned a little. He said, "No, I don't know when he went." And then he laughed and said, "Yeah, I did. He went. He's okay. He went." So they let me alone, and I lay around there for another day or two, and then I got up and got my clothes on and started walking. And for 30 days, I walked and would sit and rest. And they'd change that bandage 3 or 4 times a day because they couldn't stop the bleeding. But they never gave me any blood, and I have not to this day understood that. Except it must have been that they had people that needed it worse than I, and which I was happy for them to have it instead of giving it to me because I was still normal. My pressure was normal, my pulse was normal, and everything, and so they just said, "He's going to make it without any transfusions." And I did. I went home, though, after 30 days in that hospital, went back to the base. I had my choice of going to a station hospital down in Barry or going back to my base. I said, I want to go back to my duty base. So they sent me back. I went back, right back. My bed was still empty. They hadn't filled it with anybody. In a little house we built. And I went back and hitchhiked all over the country. I did go back to flying for 2 weeks. And I still had a bandage over my shoulder and it was still draining. And I found out that they couldn't sew it up. They had to leave it open so it would drain. And it drained, and they changed bandages, and it drained, and they changed bandages. But when it healed, it was just a round scar about big as a quarter, right here on my right shoulder. And it wouldn't go back any further than a perpendicular to the ground. I didn't have any motion, backward motion at all. So for that 2 weeks and another 2 weeks after, I walked around popping this arm back against that blockage. And it began to loosen, that muscle started to loosen as it healed. And I got full range of it before I quit exercising. And when I went back to flying, I went back in the right seat, and we had the toughest mission I ever had in my life to Vienna and Austria. They had about 600 ACAC guns around that place, and they'd put up a black cloud that you had to fly through, and that black cloud was from flak burst. I thought I'd die. I didn't have a thing to do. I wasn't flying the airplane, and I just finally got down and put my head on my knees and just blocked it all out and rode through that stuff. Of course, if Herc had needed me, all he had to do was touch me and I would have known to take over. Of course, I'd been flying for that 2 weeks. I'd go up and fly around. But I didn't go on a mission for 2 weeks. But we got back from that, and years later, I met my ex-squadron commander, Abe Lincoln, and his wife, Nita. Your mother and I, Butch, Evelyn, went over to see them in Arkansas where they had a timeshare. They had been to see us over on our new house in Georgia, down there on about 2 years before Evelyn died. They came to see us and stayed in the house with us, and they were so kind to her, kind to me. I got up one morning, had been up about all night with Evelyn, and I missed them. They were in that front bedroom, and I went out, and Abe and Nita were sitting on the deck in the back. You know that little deck we had back there that I'd put a roof over, and that matched the house. They were sitting back there, and Nita had made coffee, and they were sitting back there just enjoying the beauty and the quietness. And I walked out and I loved that couple dearly. They have both since died, but they were good friends of ours. And I'm digressing now because my chain of thought has been kind of broken. But anyway, I went back to flying, and I flew 2 or 3 more missions with Herky and his bunch, and they were the only crew that I ever really knew in Italy or after, because they were the ones I went over with, and they were the ones I was with who looked after me when I got hurt. And I looked after them as with Herky, and they came to me with a lot of their problems. And so they were my bunch. But one day in the mess hall, Charles Davis, my squadron ops officer, came to me. I was sitting there playing pinochle or something with the 3 other guys. He said, "Preach, how you feeling?" I said, "Fine." He says, "You want to lead the squadron tomorrow?" I says, "What's in it for me, Captain?" He says, "A promotion." I said, "I'll do it." That's all was said. The next day I led a mission, had my 6 airplanes behind me, and so I kind of went from co-pilot to being a squadron leader. And I got my promotion to captain, as he had promised. And I led the squadron and thoroughly enjoyed it, because I sat out in front of 5 other airplanes, sometimes 6, and I flew formation on the box ahead of me. And I remember being up in a field hospital after that, because my assistant ops officer, Bob, I got a blank mind, it'll come to me, had caught a piece of flak in the calf of his leg. It took a wedge out, just like a piece of pie, out of that muscle. And he was there in bed with another guy that had been hit, and I didn't even notice who it was. And I went in, I said, "Bob, how you doing?" "Oh, pretty good, pretty good." I said, "Well, your leg okay?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "How you doing?" I said, "All fine." And this other guy over there says, "Graves?" And I looked around, I said, "Yes, sir." And it was my assistant group manager, group operator. He was a Lieutenant Colonel Campbell. He had taken another piece of flak. He was there with Bob. And I said, "Well, Colonel, why didn't you make yourself known? I wasn't ignoring you. I just didn't know that was you." He said, "That's all right. By the way, got 2 things I want to go over with you." I said, "Yes, sir." One is, what about this word that I got that you went down to pick up a new airplane and you didn't take a co-pilot with you? I says to myself, uh-oh, caught again. I said, "Yes, sir, that's exactly right. I couldn't find a co-pilot, so I took my flight engineer and another pilot and a co-pilot. We went and got that airplane, and they flew it back." I didn't tell him at the time, but the pilot that I took with me wanted to fly the airplane down, and I said, "Sure." So he was flying, and I was in the right seat. And when he landed, the left seat, the pilot's seat, broke off of the track and ran all the way back to the armor plating, and he couldn't even reach control. I just took over and landed the airplane. We taxied around, I shut them down. And they got out to go get the new airplane, and my crew chief I took with me, he said, "Preach, what are we going to do?" I said, "Well, I'll tell you, throw that seat back here on the flight deck where it's out of the way. You get out over there under that wheel where you can see the instruments on your knees, and you watch going. I'm going to take this airplane home. You going to fly from the right seat?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I can fly as good over there as I can in the left." So I crawled on the right seat and cranked her up, and we went home. I didn't give it a thought. just reported the seat was broken, had the ground crew fix it. And what about that seat, the colonel said, what about that time you flew back without a co-pilot? But I didn't tell him about that seat, that I had to fly the airplane from the right seat. And so I said, yes, sir, I did. Well, how did you manage that? And then I had to tell him. He said, well, would you take care that that doesn't happen again? Be sure to take a co-pilot with you. I said, well, I had one with me going up there, but I didn't have him coming back. And it didn't matter. Well, I said, Colonel, you know, I've flown about as much from the right seat in formation, combat missions, and everything else as I have from the left. He just shook his head and walked off. But anyway, nothing came of that. And then Davis wanted me to fly lead, so I did. And he put me in for promotion in 4 months after I got hurt. And I went on and finished my missions. Flying, and I totaled up my flying time. Bo and I had more flight hours in the air flying than I had in combat while I was there. Flying to 50 missions. Be that as may. Came home from there, and Mother and Dad, of course, were still on the farm. Russell was in flight training, my second brother, second oldest. He had a wife and child. He had a hard time getting in because he was within 6 months of being over age. But they used to tell me I could sell a refrigerator to an Eskimo, but now Russell could. And he kept everybody happy, and he got his entry into flight school, and he was flying B-26s. Getting on orders to go overseas when the war was over in Europe. And of course, like most of the people in service in Europe, they came home right away within 6 months or so. And I was happy for that. So I went back to Smyrna, where I was flying, when I had to go down to, now let me think a minute to get it straight. I got out of the service on August the 19th, 1945. Russell was out by October, Thanksgiving of that year, and he and his wife and child were home. He was home with a discharge, and I was glad for him. And I went on back to Smyrna, and I was on a 6 months limited duty from going down to Maxwell and having a physical. And I went back to Smyrna with that, which I didn't want. I wasn't disabled. But I went before a review board, and they says, what do you want to do? I says, go home. If you take away my flying privileges because of this, just give me a discharge and let me go. If I can't fly, I don't want to stay. I don't want any part of it if I can't fly. Well, they says, well, you're on 6 months temporary limited duty and you in here for a discharge. You got 4 months to go. I said, well, so be it. Whatever. I just don't want to stay in if you ground me. So they let the 6 months stand. And I went on back out to the base, and I had been assigned to a captain who had a little old radio something out there on the edge of the base, and I didn't know what he was doing or what he was out there for. But I went out there, and I had already picked up some leave papers. And I says, and I was a captain, he was a captain. I says, what do you want me to do? He said, I don't have anything for you to do. I said, well, how about signing these leave papers and I'll go home I got over a month coming, I'll just go home for a while. So he did and I did. And my instruction time at Smyrna was very enjoyable. We flew all over the country. And I didn't have to wash out but one student, and he was a first lieutenant who sat under that left seat, like a dummy. He wouldn't talk. He wouldn't say a word. He didn't fly the airplane except like a mechanic. He went through the motions. If it was time to give it some right wheel, he'd give it a little right wheel. The right rudder. Excuse me. Then he'd ride the airplane and sit there. I'd have to tell him the next move to make. So I said, Lieutenant, do you like to fly? Do you want to fly anymore? I says, you want to get out? So I took him back, recommended to discharge him, send him home. They did. And he left. The only one I had to give up on. But I didn't have.
1, 2, 3. Okay. It's good.
When I left Humboldt, to get my mind right here now. Oh, when we left Clovis, New Mexico, we were being sent by train to Savannah, Georgia, Chatham Field. So I got on a train and rode overnight from Clovis, New Mexico to Memphis, and was there a few days and then on to Savannah in the fall. There we were issued new airplanes. Each crew got a brand new airplane. And of course we had to give them a search and rescue mission, so to speak. Checked out all the guns and, the engines and all the systems in the airplane and everything. So we came up on Christmas time, and Mother was coming down to Savannah. Dad couldn't come. He was feeling poorly. And so I asked Mother if she would bring Evelyn Sedbury with her, who was my girlfriend at the time and love of my life for 69 years thereafter. But anyway, she came down with Mother, and we stayed at the DeSoto Hotel. She and Mother had a room, and I got a room up there around the corner and down the hall, and we had a good time together there. With Abner was talking to his girlfriend in Medford, Oregon, on the phone, and they wanted to get married. And so I kidded Abner into just telling her that, well, get on the train, come on over here. You can be here in 3 days. He said, well, okay. He called her and said, come on. Well, she came in on the train, and she was a principal person. And so they got married. And Evelyn came in with Mother, and we were at the hotel, and I was to leave the next day. And so they made their plans to go back to Humboldt on a train. And Evelyn started crying. She says, I can't go. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I'm not going to leave you. I'm going to stay with you till you have to go. Well, of course, I just blew up and burst over that, you know. It excited me so, and I was so proud of her. And so I said, well, now, honey, I don't believe you can do that. She said, well, I'll just call my daddy. I said, no, I'll call him. So I called Mr. Carl, and I said, we're leaving here in a couple of days, and Mother is scheduled to come back tomorrow on a train, and Evelyn says she's not going to leave me till I have to go. What should I do? He says, well, son, you know how we're in a small town. If you do that, why, it's going to be the talk of the town. And although I know everything will be all right. And I know you know that. I said, yeah. So she was weeping and crying, and I was about to. And so finally I says, well, you know what we can do? She says, what? I said, we could get married. And she just kind of got excited about that. And so I called the hotel manager, and Mr. Williams, and he says, why, yes, we can arrange that for this evening if you like. What church you want? And I told him the nearest Methodist church, and it was the name of it will come to in a minute, but there was a Reverend Frayne was the minister over there, and he agreed to come up for us to come down to the church, which is about 2 blocks from Hotel Trinity Methodist, I believe. And so Herky and Edith and Abner and Carol, his new bride, and Rosie was there, and what was Rosie's wife's name? It'll come to me in a minute too. But they came. We all went down to church 7 o'clock at night, and Mr. Williams says, I'll pick you and the bride up at the hotel at 7 o'clock. He did. We went out and got in a Lincoln Zephyr. He drove us to the church, and we were married there, and all the guys and their wives that were there stood around. Mother was with us, of course. So we got married. But let me add a little anecdote to the side of that. On the way to the courthouse, which is in walking distance of the hotel, we were crossing the street, and a little black boy ran out in the street, and a car hit him. He had bombed off that right front finger, and he went out in the street on his back, and I pulled it loose from Evelyn, and we were just walking across there. She said, come on, honey, they're waiting on us over there. They're going to close. And I said, well, I got to see about this kid. So I went over there, and he was getting up, and didn't hurt him much. I put a knot on his head, and I said, son, you all right? And I said, okay. I went back and got her. We went on to the hotel, to the courthouse, walked in there, sat the clerk and his helper, nobody else in the courthouse, and we went in there, and I says, this is Evelyn Sedbury, and I'm Lieutenant Everett Graves, and we're come for a wedding license. He said, we have it ready for you. They called us from a church, from a hotel. I said, okay. I think it was $2 or something, so we paid that and went on back to the hotel, and then at 7 o'clock we went down and got in this Lincoln Zephyr with Mr. Williams, and he drove us to the hotel, and he waited for us, I think. Drove us down to the church. And so we went in, had the ceremony, and it was short, but real nice and a little emotional for us. And we walked out in a few minutes, and we were married. And I looked at her and I said, you know what we've done? She said, I sure do. I said, me too. So we went on back to the hotel, and all of us went downstairs and down there we were dancing last night and fooling around with the crowd. And so that's how that came about. And I went down and talked with Mother, and after the ceremony, and I said, "Now, Mother, you can go ahead and you can stay or you can go back." And she says, "Well, Aunt Sally, her sister's oldest son, had pneumonia, and they gave him a sulfa drug, and he subsequently died from it a couple of days later after she got back. But it killed him. It was sulfa, it was real new. I don't know what happened, but he died." And so she went back and left Evelyn down there with me. So she moved to my room, and we checked her room out and paid the bill. And what was real funny too, we went down to eat one night in the hotel dining room, meeting the rest of the guys and their wives. And she said something about oysters when we got down there. I didn't think it. She said, "I sure would like to have some oysters." And all those guys just roared, brand new bride wanting oysters, And then it dawned on me what she said, and I laughed too. And then she laughed. We just had a big laugh about that. It was really a icebreaker for the whole bunch. But we were there for a couple more days, and then we had to go. When we left in our airplanes, Evelyn and Herky's wife, Edith, and Carol had gotten there from over in Oregon, and she and Abner had gotten married, and we went to that wedding. So the three of them were out, and I watched out the window of the airplane as we took off. They were climbing the fence, coming over to the runway, those three women. And I said to Herc, I says, "I think you're going to try to get on the tail of the airplane." And we were just heartsick, both of us, because he's leaving his wife and I was leaving mine. And Abner's down in the nose of the airplane leaving his, as was Rosie. So all four of us had wives, and we left them. And we flew on across, and that's just a little anecdote that I wanted to put in there because it was a sad but joyful time for all of us, the entire crew. We knew we were going to combat, we didn't know where. Figured it was Europe because we were leaving from the East Coast. And once we got out in the airplane, we had sealed orders, and after we got 100 miles out, we could open them. We did, and there it was. Spinazzola, Italy. New base. Well, we flew on across from Savannah. We went to New York, and as luck would have it, we stayed there 10 days. And I don't know what the idea was. We were all just get out. We got stir crazy. Finally, we got orders to leave. And we got out and flew on out down to Palm Beach, Florida. And stayed there overnight and down to Belém, Brazil the next day. And the next day on down to Fortaleza. Change of destination because Natal rather, was full of airplanes. So we stayed there, and we all bought us a pair of boots down there, and we walk. I wore those boots the whole time. I didn't wear them on missions. I wore my GI heavy walking shoes, but those boots were kind of dressy, and you saw them, I think, when I got back. After you were born. You might not remember them, but we wore those boots, and I wore them till they just bed draggled, just worn out. And now we're down at Fortaleza, and we left at 11 o'clock at night, 30-minute intervals. We had a string of airplanes all the way across the Atlantic in 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours. And we landed over there, and I could look out and see the coast of Africa. And I called Rosie, our navigator. I said, "Rosie, where are we?" He said, "Well, we're about 2 hours from landfall." I said, "Well, we are." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what's that big glob of land I see out in front of us?" He looked out and he said, "I guess it's Africa." We all got a laugh out of that. And it was. We went on in there and landed within an hour. And landed on a steel matting runway, first one had been on. I thought the airplane was falling apart. Oh, you never heard such clattering and rattling, that steel under the airplane, rolling on it. Herc and I looked at each other and said, "Well, we're still rolling. I guess it's all right." And we stayed there a couple of days, and then flew our route on up through Marrakech and into Tunisia. And we stayed up there in the city of Tunis. Had a little dirt strip runway out there. And we stayed there for about a week. They didn't have a runway finished in Italy for us to land on. They were laying steel matting up there over sand. They'd graded and packed and stuff and laid this matting on. So when we got word that we could land there, we went on up there. And while we were in Africa, they took our airplane. I don't know how they singled our crew out, but they took our airplane and flew it up as a replacement into Italy. So we had to hitchhike. So we caught a ride with another crew, and we had an airplane with 20 men on it, unless they split us up and put the 4 of us in it, one and the other 6 guys in another airplane. I don't remember, but we weren't crowded, so they must have. So we flew on up there and landed on our strip, and it clattered and rattled around there, and then we pulled off to the, let's see now. No, we didn't get on there that day, I guess. We stayed down a little dirt strip like in Tunis for a couple of days and flew a couple of practice missions out of there, if I remember correctly. Then we went on up there. Well, A.J. Mills and his crew was somewhere in the line there. And we got on up to Italy, and they came later. He and a pilot named Corey. Corey had a new wife, and she was the prettiest thing you ever saw. Friendly, nice, just first class all the way. Well, it's like our wives were. And they were there together at Savannah. And so we got to know them there. But on the way up from Tunis to Italy, it was Corey and Mills' crew and another crew, 3 ships. And they got in the weather, they got kind of mixed up, got lost. No navigational functions over a strange country and weather. And so we got word that the 3 of them were down. Oh man, I about died. And I dragged around there just in sorrow for a couple of days, and then I looked up and saw Mills walking across our base. I hollered at him. I said, "Hey, where in the world did you come from?" He says, "Well, preach, let me tell you." Says, "I was with them when we had a 3-ship formation, and we were trying to get down and get some visual to the ground, and we got low and got over an airport, and it was full of 109s. And I thought, well, now we got to get out of here." But we flew on, and then finally we were just knowing nothing between us and the clouds but the mountains. And he said, "I just went on instruments and pulled the nose up. I left them. And I got out and found my way on up here to our base. And I just got in here yesterday afternoon or this morning. Corey and the other crew smacked the mountain. Killed all 20 of them. So I was grateful that AJ got through that. I knew Corey, but not well. I knew AJ pretty well. We'd been through training together and everything. So I was happy he was there, and we got to palling around. They built a house, and we built a house, and we were flying missions on each other's wing in the same box and such as that. And I believe that I covered what in our dissertation yesterday, anything about missions or anything much other than
Not really.
Yeah.
Nothing specific.
Well, we flew every day that the weather permitted, and on missions, and we had to fly 50, and the guys in England had to fly 25. And so we decided that we didn't think it was a good idea. So we complained about it. Why do we fly 50 and they don't fly but 25? Same darn guys shooting at them, shooting at us. Same fighter planes shooting at us as shooting at them. Why not? So they got around and said, well, here's what we'll do. Everything over 600 miles, we'll count it as 2. So about the last third of my missions were doubles. So I actually flew 35 trips to get 50 missions in. And I think I mentioned Jason can do this, fix it like it ought to be fixed. But I think that did I tell you about being in the hospital and all that? Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And stop it there a minute, let me think if you can. I don't know exactly where I was.
Just start over talking about Bob Carroll. That's fine.
Okay, Bob Carroll was our assistant operations officer, and he didn't have a crew as did George Davis, the ops officer, and Abe Lincoln, our CO. So they would cut the co-pilot off of a crew, and the pilot would take the right seat, and they would be the pilot in charge of the airplane for that mission. And we had a waist gunner that we had picked up on there that was, he was a loser. His name was Louderback. He wouldn't take a bath. He wouldn't change clothes. He'd put his feet in his flying boots without socks, and they stunk to high heaven. And all of that stuff, and he was just a drag to all of our crew, except of course the 4 of us stayed up there in the house. But there were 6 of those in a tent together.
Oh, the enlisted guys.
Yeah. Our non-coms. And he made life miserable for all of them, and we tried to get rid of him, we tried to get him replaced, nobody would do it. Couldn't get we just don't have a replacement. We don't have anybody put in his place. Well, keep looking. Give me one of the cooks. We'll train him to shoot a machine gun, a waist gun, but they wouldn't. So we lived with that clown. He'd come back from a mission, and he'd pull his helmet or his gloves off and get frostbite, and come back, hey, I got frostbite, do I get a Purple Heart? He said that to me one day. I said, over my dead body you'll get a Purple Heart. Why'd you keep your helmet on? Well, I wanted a Purple Heart. Well, you're going to keep on, you're going to get one. Somebody going to shoot you. And anyway, we wouldn't have harmed him at all. Of course not, he was a crew member. But he did tax our nerves and everything. So one day, Bob Carroll was going to fly with our crew, and I was in the right seat, and we were going on up toward somewhere up there in Europe, and I forget the mission that day, but it was tall cumulus clouds, and we were kind of working our way through them and climbing and get on up above them. And two 10s, 2 or 3, round a cloud and right in our face. And Bob and I both ducked. I mean, they just right there. And this clown in the back, Lauderback, don't shoot, they're P-38s. I said, P-38's my butt. They're 210s. And when he said that, Carol looked at me and I looked at Carol and I says, he's got to go. He says, I agree. That was his last mission with us. They found somebody. Anyway, that's when we got rid of him, so they put him digging slit trenches. He'd dig slit trenches and then he'd sneak off from that, hitchhike to town, and he'd gather a catch of cigarettes and whatever and take them to town black market. So Abe was coming back from Barry or somewhere one day, and there's old Lauderback walking down the road. Abe recognized me, stopped. And I was, hey there, Captain Lincoln. Don't Captain Lincoln me, hit the road. And he bumped him with the bumper of the Jeep. They're about 2 or 3 miles from base, all the way to base. Go! Go! He'd slow down, he'd bump him. He bumped him back to the base. He said, why aren't you up there doing what I assigned you to do? Well, I had to go sell my cigarettes. He just made matters worse. But anyway, I got rid of Lauderback. We got him out of our. Then we picked up a gunner, a waist gunner, and he had been shot down with Colonel Crowder. He was on that crew. And it was early. It was before I got hurt. Colonel Crowder, I would think, was shot down. He was our group commander. He was shot down about our 3rd or 4th mission. But Axis Sally, now you know who that is. Mm-hmm. Axis Sally broadcast in English from Berlin, and she told us, and we heard it over the radio, because we all had little radios we could tune into Axis Sally. And she said, well, now, you Black Panthers, you're there, and you're getting settled in, and you're going to be flying missions, and we know where you are, and we'll know where you're going when you start out, and we'll be with you, and we'll take care of you, starting with your commander. She broadcast that. So, not in those words, but she told us our CO was going down. Mm-hmm. Well, this gunner that we got was on that ship. And he got back. He bailed out. And a 210 came in and attacked the lead ship head on. And he shot the whole nose off that airplane almost. Killed both pilots. And of course, the airplane was out of control. And it crashed, and the crew jumped. Nobody died on it, I think, but the pilot and co-pilot, and maybe the guys in the nose. I don't remember. But Morovic was this guy's name, and he was telling me about it when he landed in his parachute. And this German woman came out there and kind of patched him up a little bit. And when she came and spoke to me, said, I just put my arms around her and cried like a baby. I said, well, John, nobody would fault you for that. But she was kind to you, and she looked after him until he was picked up and brought back. But he joined our crew, and he was a good man, and he died a few years ago with a heart attack, as did Rosie Day. We called him Rosie. And then our belly turret gunner, Gene Johnson, was a nose gunner. He's still alive. lives in Arizona. Tried to get him on the phone, and they weren't at home. I was going to go by there to see him. He lived in Coolidge, Arizona. And when we went to St. Louis in 1985 for our crew reunion, it was central. We had a couple of people, one in California, one in Arizona, and 2 or 3 up on the East Coast and all. St. Louis is about a central location. So we voted to go there. And Gene Johnson, our nose gunner, and his wife Barbara got that thing started for us to get together. They called me or wrote me a letter, I forget which. And we're thinking about all of us getting together. What do you think? And whom do you know that you have an address to? So we burned up the phone lines. I'd call a long distance operator and I'd say, I'm looking for such and such in such and such a town. Can you help me? And here's his name. And she'd search till she found him and called me back. Oh, the phone company just was best to us. They knew we're all veterans and we needed some help. So we got together in St. Louis, and we all were all up there except Vizina, and the doctor wouldn't let him come. He was our nose gunner. Vizina was the tail gunner. His wife couldn't travel. The doctor wouldn't let her travel, so they stayed in Rhode Island. But we called him on the phone, and we all talked to him from St. Louis. And to digress a bit, later we found out he had cancer. So I called Steve up in Pittsburgh, and our waist gunner and radio operator. I said, Steve, you want to ride a little? He said, yeah, where are we going? I said, we're going up to see Vizina. Evelyn and I will be up there in a couple of days. We drove to Pittsburgh, out to their little town outside of Pittsburgh. Stayed a couple of nights with them, then drove on up to Rhode Island. And found Ernie's house up there in the old section of 2 or 3 story buildings, with some of them were individual homes, some were apartments. He had an individually occupied home, he and his wife, Viola. And we went in and spent an afternoon with them, and Kenneth Jennings, who was our belly turret gunner, lived up near Boston, and he and his wife came down to Ernie's house, and they were there with us. So 4 of us were together there in Rhode Island, and we had the best time. And we only stayed a day, and then we headed back. Got down the road a ways and went in the hotel, Holiday Inn, and spent the night. Then on back to Steve's house over in Pennsylvania, not far from Latrobe, where Arnie Palmer was raised, the golfer. And we stayed over there with them, went to church with them on Sunday, and had communion in his Catholic church. And Bertie went to communion. Of course, we weren't Catholic. We couldn't go, or didn't. I guess we could have. But I noticed Steve didn't go. And afterwards, I said, Steve, why don't you take communion with Bertie? Oh, he says, I haven't been to confession. Until I go to confession, I can't take communion. I says, oh, and I didn't question him anymore. So, but he told me why he couldn't go, and that's all I wanted to know. He had to go confess, and then he could go take communion. But we went to church with them, and we stayed up there with them about a week. Then we went by and got them, and went on up to another trip to Pittsburgh, and went on up to Rhode Island, and spent Bernie with Ernie and his wife, her name was Viola, he called her Vi. After he died and he was on his last legs, he was still ambulatory and went out to breakfast with him. We went out and had lunch. And we got up there after breakfast and went out and had lunch. And he and Vi went with us. And Ernie is the guy that came to me one night in Italy. Somebody knocked on the door, and I went to the door. And it was Ernie. He says, "I'd like for you to read this, if you would." I said, "What is it, Ernie?" "It's a letter from Vi." "You want me to read it?" He says, "If you would, please." So I read it. "Dear John," she had decided she didn't want to be married to him anymore. Well, that just didn't sit right with me somehow. And I thought there and thought to him, I said, "Ernie, what do you want me to say? Tell me what I ought to do." "Okay, here's what you do. You write Vi back and you tell her that you understand that she's lonely. I miss you too, honey. I understand that. However, bear in mind that if," and I don't know if, no, how did "bear in mind that if she leaves you to go with him, she won't stay. She'll leave him to go somewhere else. You write her and tell her if that's what she's dead level set on doing, to just go and don't look back. I'll manage." And they had a kid or two. "I'll manage when I get home." And she was still with him when he died. She didn't go anywhere. He told her that. He just put it down black and white. If you go, just go. Don't be there when I get back. Just go. And I hope you be happy. She saw then that she was married to some kind of a man, and so she didn't go. So we got up there and we laughed and we talked, and that crazy Ernie, he got to telling us at lunch about when he got back from Italy, he was in the army out there and they put him driving a 10-ton truck. He weighed about 130 pounds, little bitty dude. And he had us in stitches telling us about driving that truck. He said, "You know, I was in that big old truck and I was trying to keep it in the road and it was muddy. And said, I'd turn that wheel and it wouldn't turn. I'd turn it wouldn't turn. And said, I'd get stuck and it wouldn't run. I couldn't get it out. And everybody hollering at me to go on, and I couldn't go anywhere." He laughed. Steve and I sat there, all of us, Evelyn and Bertie. We just had tears, and I was laughing at him. He said, "What can I do 130 pounds in a 10-ton truck?" Oh, he was a sight. But anyway, he's gone now, but we did get up to see him before he died. And he was grateful. One of his daughters wrote me a letter after we got back and told me that he had died, but he died peacefully with that cancer, and thanked us again for coming to see him. And I wrote her back and I says, "Well, remember," I forget her name, "remember, we were kind of like a family. And when something happened to one, it happened to all of us. And when one hurt, we all hurt. And one cried, we all cried. You know, we were just a group." And she was most appreciative of that. John Murovic died, and I didn't know when. I just got word. I believe his wife wrote us a note that he had died. But he wasn't one of our original crew, you see, so he was one of us, but he wasn't one of us, you know what I mean. And Rosie was still in St. Louis smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He'd light one off of another. And I told him overseas sometime, or maybe it was in St. Louis, I says, "Rose, you ought to quit smoking those things. They're going to kill you." Well, he says, I guess so, but I just crave them. And Helen, his wife, would say, he won't quit. Finally, he died. I don't know if it was cancer or what. I think Helen wrote us a note, but I don't remember what. But now there's Abner the bombardier. So far as I know, he's still living. And Ernie the nose gunner. Herky the pilot. And how many did I name? 3?
Mm-hmm.
Ernie and Herc and Abner. If he's still living, that's 3. Who's the 4th one?
You're 4.
Huh?
You're 4.
I'm the 4th one. Okay. Hey, wake me up, Bo. I'm not waiting. Okay, well, we went up to St. Louis, and we all got in there, and the ones that had gotten there, we'd meet at the gate as they came in off the airplanes, see if we recognized them. Well, here they all come except Ernie. Gene's a big old, gawky, awkward guy. He weighs 240 pounds now. His wife sent us pictures of their family. He's got 3 children and about 10 grandchildren. And they all live out in Coolidge, Arizona together. And he's retired now, of course. And he's a guy that had, one day we were getting off the airplane. I guess we were in New York. We'd been up flying a practice mission or something before we left. His lips all cracked open and bleeding. Oh, I felt so bad about it. I said, Ernie, you got any lip eyes? No. And you remember those big camphor sticks we could buy for a dime? Big as a nickel, about that long. I had one in my pocket. I carried one all the time. Bought a handful to take overseas with. Of course, your lips chap up there, as you know. And I said, here, you take this. You get back to the house, get that blood and stuff off your mouth. Just slide this over there. And you keep your lips moist with it, and they'll heal up. And they won't get this way anymore. Well, he thanked me. 3 or 4 days later, his lips were well, and he was so happy. But he was the kind of a guy we had. And Steve came up to the house one night. He said, Preach, you got any whiskey? I said, yeah. Now, to tell you how I got the whiskey, I flew this Captain Mitchell around for his gunners to track us. I didn't tell you about that. Mm-hmm. He was a Scottish captain on the British Army. And he didn't drink bourbon, but he got a fifth of bourbon a week in his supplies.
Good grief.
Or maybe it was a month. But he had 3 or 4 bottles stashed there in his cabin. He didn't drink anything but scotch. He was drinking bourbon. So he invited me down to have lunch with him one day. They lived out on the edge of our base out there in that little compound. I guess he had about 20 gunners out there, and they had their own little mess hall and a cook, everything. He wore hobnail boots and shorts and wool socks up to here, and all that. Stood about 6'3", 240 pounds, red-headed, red-faced, freckle-faced, strong as a bull. Captain Mitchell. Well, I walked in the day room down in our squadron orderly room one day. George Davis was there, and he said, Preach, come here a minute. I went over there, and he says, shake hands with Captain Mitchell. Hey, Captain. I said, how are you? I said, damn, they grow tall where you came from. And he started laughing. And he laughed, and then Davis said, he's head of the ACAC guns here around our base. And he's their headquarters down here at the edge of our base. Well, I knew they were down there, but I hadn't met any of them. But I met their CO. and talk with Captain Mitchell a minute and see what we can do for him. I said, what do you need, Captain? He said, well, I need someone to take an airplane up and to about 10,000 and just fly around, let our gunners practice tracking him. Because we hadn't had anybody to shoot at. We didn't have any enemy planes over our base. And so they never fired a gun except in practice. And they didn't fire much then. I said, well, now, Captain Mitchell, that'll be fine. I'll be happy to do it. We'll go whenever you're ready. But I said, on one idea. First time they pull a trigger, we're going to kick your ass out of that airplane. They can track, but don't shoot. Of course, we're flying mission, getting shot at every day. But he laughed, and I was standing there, he just reached down and put a hand on each one of my elbows, and I bent him up. He just picked me up even with him. He was laughing. I said, I'm serious. I don't believe you think I'm serious, but I'm serious as all get out. Don't get trigger happy up here with your guns trained on my airplane. We get enough of that from our crowd heads. And he got the biggest kick out of that. Anyway, we went up and we climbed up 10,000 feet. And I just flew back and forth and zigged and zagged and let them track us with their radar, you know. We did that 2 or 3 times. We got to be pretty good friends. And, he called me one day, and came by one day. He had a truck, one of those big old 4-wheel drive British lorries or whatever they call them. He called it a 2400 weight. He came up in that 2400, got out and stepped down on the ground. He's about 6.5 feet tall, and big sucker. He said, let's go over to the coast and go swimming. I said, which coast you talking about? He said, I'm talking about that one about 60 miles from here, due west of here. I says, when you want to go? He says, how about right now? It wouldn't be over in an hour. I said, what are we going in? We going in my 2400 weight. I says, in that piece of junk? He reached my elbows again. Laughed. Oh, we had more fun. Well, we got in that thing and we drove over there. You're setting up high as a ceiling off the ground. And we got over there and went out there on the coast. Oh, rough coast. I mean, it wasn't no beach or anything, just water. And we pulled our clothes off and jumped into Adriatic. And we swam around a while. And got back and dried off and put our clothes on, came back. Had a big time. And he's the one that furnished me with bourbon. So I was down there one day and he said, you want a sip? I said, yeah, I'll take a sip. So he went and got a bottle of bourbon, 5th of bourbon. I said, you drink this? He said, no, I'm a Scotsman. I said, what do you do with it? And he said, well, I give it away. I said, can I have this one? Sure. I said, thank you. How much you want for it? Nothing. It's rations for me. So he gave me a 5th, and I stuck it in my jacket and took off when I left. Took it in the house. I said, hey, guys. Hey, where you been? I said, well, it's my secret. But here it is if you want a little taste of it. So they did, and they took them a little swig. We weren't flying the next day. And I kept it there. So I was there one night and had a bottle, about that much out of it, back over in my locker. And it was Steve. Have you ever met, you didn't meet Steve, did you?
Is he the guy that met us when we went to Dayton? We landed at the airport down there south of Dayton. Who was that met us? When you and Rob and I went to Dayton.
Oh, that was Abner Clark.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
No, not
that's
Abner
right.
Clark. Maurice Clark.
Yes.
He was piloting my
Yeah,
squadron.
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he took us in a car back
Yeah.
up there. Yeah.
Right.
No, that was Maurice Clark. I didn't even know it was in Savannah. I got off, went out there to get on the bus. to go where we were going that day, and there was one guy sitting on the bus in the front left seat. I said, "Well, you gonna go by yourself?" And he looked up and he says, "Hey, preach." I said, "Emmy, is that you?" He said, "Yeah." Maurice Everett. I think his initials are M.E. We call him M.E. And so I sat down beside him. And his wife didn't go and Evelyn didn't go to that either, so she stayed at the hotel. So we rode in and stayed together out there, and he's in some pictures I got taken with A.J. and Abe Lincoln and all that I've got in my scrapbook. And that's the Clark that you're thinking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But old Steve came up here and knocked on the door. "Preach, you got any whiskey?" I said, "Yeah, I might have a little swig." He said, I says, "Is it bad, Steve?" He says, "It's bad." And I knew exactly what he meant. I says, "Come on in." He came in. And I went back there and got it. I don't know if anybody was there but me or not. Didn't matter. I got it and just handed it to him. That must be in full fifth. You take it on back there and you dole it out to the boys. You dole it out as long as it lasts. We're not flying tomorrow. So you can just get rested, get relaxed. And they did. They were the most relaxed bunch I ever saw that next afternoon when they woke up and sobered up. Of course, 6 guys, and I don't know if Louderback was still there or not. But probably we had Morovich in, but I don't remember. But they drank it all, and they were relaxed and singing and backslapping and joking and carrying on, so it helped them.
Mm-hmm.
And
so this is the crew, your original crew that you went over there with, that you then were separated from when you got hurt.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when I came back from the hospital, after being gone a month, I was out for 2 more weeks, and I took a hitchhiking trip. I just packed my little old shoulder duffel bag and hit the road, walking and riding Beulah horse carts and whoever catch her at ride with, going south. There was a rest leave camp down there up on a high cliff that I'd seen from the air, and I just wanted to go down there. So I hitchhiked down there. And it got dark, and it got to a little town. I went and knocked on the door, and this lady came. I said, "Ma'am, you speak of the English?" "Yeah." I says, "Me, sleep, here." "Ah, come on in." Put me in the front room up there, and I slept on a little cot up there. Woke up daylight the next morning, and got up and dressed and left. Left them $5 or something on the bunk. And our money, which they could spend. Not his printed money, but his occupational money. $5 bill. Maybe a 10, I don't know. If I left it with them. And I hit the road again and got on down to this place. And there's a 2-story building. Reminded me a lot of a hospital over there in Foggia, because it was a 2-story barracks-like building, and probably had 100 rooms in it, 50 to a floor or less. And that's the way this place is built, except it was just all rooms. It wasn't wing, just one building. And I got there and I walked in, and I noticed a bunch of non-coms sitting out on the front balcony overlooking the Adriatic. And it was right there, high 500-foot cliff or something like, I know it was all the B-24 could do to climb it. I climbed into 24 one day. Went over the top, full throttles and half flaps, just hanging. I misjudged the height of it, but I didn't have to turn back. And I went in there and I said, I took my insignia off, but it didn't have any stripes or anything on it. and took me to college. I found out it was an enlisted man's rest camp from the infantry.
From the infantry.
Well, it was a rest camp for our troops over there in Italy. They'd go down there for a couple of weeks. We went to the Isle of Capri, the flight cruise, and that's where they went, I guess. And one of the nurses that I had in the hospital told me about it. And I said, who's down there? She says, just men as far as I know. I said, have you been down there? And I don't remember whether she had or not. I don't think she had. Because one woman down there would have been in a heap of trouble. And she was a young lady, young nurse. And she was one of that cadre that they picked up in Houston, moved all the personnel, all the equipment, a whole complete hospital, except for the beds and stuff like that. But as far as instruments, surgical instruments, medicine, and all of that, rubber gloves, they brought all of that with them. Unloaded it out there in Barry off of a ship and trucked it up to Foggia and set it all up in this ex-TV sanitarium that Mussolini had built. And that's where they took me. And that's where it was right in the flyby. Most of the airplanes going to Europe from Italy in that section of the country. And we had 21 bases, so there was 4 or 5 bases right around. And so we went in there, and I lost my train of thought. Where was I?
You were at the rest area with the infantry guys.
Yeah, and I went in there to eat. They said, you have your orders? I said, what orders? Well, you got to have orders to eat here. I said, no, I don't have any. He said, well, you come back after we. I said, I'm just out on a little rest leave hitchhiking tour in southern Italy. I'm a pilot in the 460th Bomb Group. And I've been injured, been wounded, and I've been in the hospital a month, and I'm just getting out and getting some fresh air. You come back after we feed everybody, I gave you something. And he did. And I was in a place for me to sleep. He says, I'm sorry about that. We just don't, if you're an officer, we can't take you. And I said, well, okay, appreciate the meal. I went back and I walked down the halls till I found an empty room. Had the mattress, you know how they do them, turned up over the foot of the bed. I curled that mattress back, got those sheets out, and I made up my bed, kicked my boots off and went to bed. Slept stalled like a log all night. Got up the next morning, and I don't remember if I ate before I left or not, but I left pretty early, walking, going back. But I sat out on that balcony 3 or 4 hours just talking to the soldiers out there. Very interesting. I don't remember what we talked about or anything about it, but I remember the conversations we had. And I wish that I'd taken some notes of it, but I didn't. So I walked on back to the base, and they said, where you been? We've been looking for you. I said, well, I hadn't been gone but 3 days. I got back to my base that afternoon, late. Picked up a ride or two. And, but the next day I was on an airplane going to Vienna. My 2 weeks recuperative time was up, I guess. They couldn't find me, so they put me on flight status. And I got on that airplane, and it was bad being a co-pilot.